Hey, everybody, this is Liz. Welcome to the show. Thanks for showing up again. And I'm joining you as usual from Central Virginia, the unceded lands of the Monacan Nation. As always, if you want to know whose native lands you're on, go over to native-land.ca. That is always in the show notes. So if you've been listening for now, I sure hope you've looked up where you are, because I tell you this every darn time. This is your friendly PSA to find out whose lands you're on. And I'm so glad that you're here. And hey, if you want to know more about the sacred feminine and feminine power, first of all, you're in the right place. There are 5 years of back episodes of this podcast before this one. So if you're brand new, go and explore the catalog. You can hear from so many amazing women on this topic. And you can also learn from me too. So if you go over to hometoher.com, you can find out the other things that I'm up to. I have a year-long book club that's going, focusing on women's voices from around the world, prioritizing non-white and indigenous women, and really looking for women who have figured out how to be on the margins of this dominant, toxic culture that we're part of, so that we can learn from them and implement solutions from them. And also, I do work one-on-one with women to really implement what we're talking about here. So it's one thing to kind of approach the sacred feminine from a philosophical standpoint, academic standpoint, which I love to do, by the way. And it's another thing to say, how does this actually show up in my life? How do I make decisions differently? How do I understand and embrace power in a way that's in alignment with all of this? So if you're curious about that, you can do a discovery call with me. We could talk about that. And there's different ways that we can work together. And with that, let's get on with our show. So pretty excited about this episode today. And one of the things that I think is frustrating about doing this particular work is that it's not in the current cultural paradigm. And so it's not like I'm going to fire up my computer and be served up, 50 incredible books, documentaries, like women, whatever, who are doing this kind of work, because it's counter to the culture. And so I get so excited when work, women, inspiration comes across my path and then I feel like, oh my God, everybody needs to know about this. So this is exactly how I feel about my guest today. Dominique Debroux is a producer, entrepreneur, and a nutritional chef whose work bridges storytelling, science, and women's empowerment. She produced 40 Weeks and the new documentary Wise Women, Humanity's Untold Origins, reframing menopause as the evolutionary foundation of female leadership. I kind of get chills just even reading that sentence. Through her film, food ventures, and advocacy, she champions women's vitality and visibility in midlife and beyond. And she's joining us today from her home in northern New Jersey. Dominique, thanks so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. And by the way, here in northern New Jersey, we are on Lenape native lands.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I realized, like, in my sort of run up to your bio, I didn't mention that the work that came across my worldview, my sphere here was this documentary, Wise Women. So we're definitely going to talk about that, because I'm all kinds of fired up about it. But where I usually like to start is just hearing from my guests a little bit about their background growing up, their religious and spiritual background, how that might have shaped where you are now. And I always tell listeners, I ask it because, number one, I'm just curious. I like to know these kinds of things. But also, I'm always curious, too, especially in the context of women's power, women's leadership. This kind of stuff matters, right? And so I'm curious, sort of how it ended up shaping how you see the world today, and if there were parts that you had to let go or parts that were actually informative. So I'd love to start there if that works.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I was brought up Roman Catholic, and I lived in Italy up until the age of 9. And I had a just world-changing situation happen when I was 6. I was going to Bible class, or catechism is what they were calling it, right? Building up to my first communion. And what the nuns were teaching me, I kept asking why, because it just didn't make sense to me. And I was often asked to just sit outside because I asked why too much. And one particular night, I just must have gotten on the nuns, like bad side. And she's like, "That's it. I'm calling your mom." And my mom had to come pick me up early. And luckily, she was okay with me asking questions, because I wasn't being nasty. I was just asking why. to
Yeah.
a lot of things. And it was raining, and there's a tremendous amount of street lights in Torino, Italy, where I grew up. And as we were driving home, I was kind of squinting at the lights, just playing with that. And do you know when you do that, there's like a center of light, and then you can almost see the particles going out into the rays and coming back. And I heard this voice in my head, that's God, that's divinity. So the center where it all connects is divinity, knowledge, everything. And then we are particles that take journeys out and we bring stuff back in. And so from that moment, just I couldn't give in to other religions. I did, after college, go to Japan and studied at a Zen Buddhist monastery because Buddhist nuns, or at least in some sects, can get married and have children. And it felt like this world was just too much. And I thought maybe I just want to go live in a monastery for the rest of my life, and realize that no, I had to be in this world, but to bring that part. But aside from that little, journey into Buddhism, spirituality for me has always meant that we are all one, we are all part of the same, and we can all connect. We are all connected to it. So the knowledge is there if you just open yourself up to it. And for me, I don't need all the dogma, because if I'm going to cheat you or hurt you, I'm just doing it to myself. So I don't need all the kind of rules to keep me in line, because basically we're all one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that's a topic let's come back to, because this comes up in your film, I
Yes.
think, directly and indirectly. It makes so much sense to me. I Wow, what a powerful image that, and what a gift! What a gift to get that at such a young age. My
Yeah.
gosh, that's
Yeah.
incredible.
I think I
Well,
was just so put down
yeah.
by these weeks of studies that I didn't understand. And obviously I opened myself up to hear.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Well, and I think, then let's see how you'd answer this question then about kind of the sacred feminine, because that was my entry point into the work that I do now, and understanding the undercurrent and the presence of patriarchy, and how it suppresses women's leadership. It really came through a spiritual awareness that, like, all of the gods that I'd been exposed to and all of my spiritual experiences had been informed by men who, in my case, couldn't tell me about the sacredness of childbirth. And this was
Mm.
right after I'd had my second child, when I'm like, oh my God, there can't be anything more sacred than, like, giving birth. So I'm curious for you, like, how the idea of the sacred feminine, if that resonates with you at all, how you might speak about that, and kind of how that fits in.
It absolutely does. So to me, the sacred feminine is just one part of the whole, right? It is the yin and yang, the dark and the light. It's just one of the two sides. And for me, so once I had that experience after college, and I decided, okay, yes, I am going to go into the job that I was hired into, and do that. Years in, I realized that I was really putting my male side forward, basically to kind of understand, rise, and survive in corporate life. And that's when I started to realize that I was suppressing part of myself. I was suppressing the artistic, the passionate, the emotional. And what's interesting is when you suppress that, it almost comes out worse. So in my younger years, I had intense emotionality. If I was angry, I was in a rage. If I was upset, I was, beyond, I was depressed. So because during my daily life, I wanted to just be the great cog in the corporate machine, and unemotional and logical, and God forbid anything that went into the right brain sort of idea of it, and into the more feminine. And when I did that, I realized that I needed more work to just open myself up. And for the past, well, for many years, I've been doing a lot of different work. And for the past maybe 4 years, I've been working particularly on, I call it listening to spirit. And to me, it's reconnecting or opening up the stuff that I had put in the way to that umbilical cord, to the core, right? We all have it. And there are so many times that I have to remind myself to take myself out of the way and just listen to what's coming. And I'll tell you, for this podcast, I sat down like maybe 11 minutes before we were meant to do it and still had to hook up my mic and stuff like that. And that's because of maybe nerves, excitement. And that's the part where that's the me getting in the way. And had I just listened, I would have been here before, calmer, etc. And when I realized that, that's when I just breathed out, connected in, and all of a sudden nerves were gone.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, and again, what it makes me think of too is just these structures, these structures that surround us, that are underneath us and around us, that create those conditions, that and then generate these kinds of responses, whether that's suppression or anxiety or whatever. And then on top of those structures, instead of like kind of pulling those apart perhaps and going, hey, is this really a good foundation on which we should be built? Then we just like layer more stuff on. We're like, oh, you got anxiety? Let's give you some medication to deal with that. And by the way, I'm not saying that those things like we have to survive in this paradigm, however
Yeah,
we can. So no judgment, if that's something that supports you. But it is kind of fascinating that it's as opposed to excavation. It's like, let's just layer on another quote unquote solution as opposed to really digging into the problem in the first place. And I kind of
exactly.
think that feels like a good sort of setup to your movie, but I'd love to hear you respond to that.
Well, yeah, to me, we are living in a very unbalanced time. I always look to nature to show me the way. And there are 51% females to 49% males in the world in general. You
Mhm.
go from 50-50 to 51-49. That's nature over a long period of time. So it's obvious that both energetics, both types of bodies, and then I am making a huge generalization because in there's a whole bunch of percentages that are not quite each pole, right?
Yeah.
So we're a range. So if we take a look at that, it means that nature wants us all to be here and that the best way forward is to work together and cooperate and bring all of the different strengths. And again, the circle, the yin and yang circle, is the two together with each other within each other. You understand?
I
So
do.
it's not just that there's two types, it's all. And really, when you look at a picture of the yin and yang, it's meant to be moving so that at all times you're just seeing gray, right?
Mm.
Because the combination is all together.
Well, let's talk about this movie Wise Women, and I'd love to
Okay.
hear just first of all, you like what was the impetus for it? Like where did this come from? Where was the seed?
Absolutely. So here, let's talk about, male, female working together, the two energetics.
Yeah.
10 years ago, a little bit more now, about 11 years ago, I went into perimenopause and quickly into menopause. Symptoms, emotional, physical, whole nine yards. And you've seen how much we've been actually finally talking about menopause in the media in general. At that time, that wasn't the case. Looking online for situations wasn't the case. Had a great doctor, but had been my OBGYN, didn't know that much on the other side. And what's great is he admitted it. He's like, look, I know one side, not so much here. And my husband, who's a documentary filmmaker, happened to be working on a project where he was interviewing menopause doctors. So I was like, oh my God, ask him questions. And he did. After the questions he was supposed to ask, he would ask questions for me. And the answers that we were getting were not only were they not fulfilling anything for me, like any knowledge that I could use, but they were really angering because in their mind, menopause was a modern thing that happened because of modern medicine and modern hygiene. One doctor even said that we have to treat menopause as nature's mistake because it's nature's mistake. And that right there, that both of our heads blew off. It's like nature does not make mistakes. And Chris is a thorough storyteller. And if something does not make sense in a story, he cannot stop until he figures it out. So he was working on a totally other film and wasn't really interested in menopause, but he couldn't help go down the research rabbit hole. And really, it's his intensity and his storytelling that from 10, 11 years ago created the film where we put the science together, understanding that menopause is actually a very important evolutionary adaptation that happened before we were even Homo sapiens. And those postmenopausal females in our ancestor groups helped those groups organize, create social leadership, and create and hold together the social complexity that helped our brains grow so that we could become the Homo sapiens that we are. And we celebrated those matriarchs, and we lived as a matriarchy for much of our history until about 10 years ago when we all kind of made a mistake over understanding where reproduction comes from, reproductive consciousness. We thought it came more from the males. And so the decision was, okay, you guys take over, you guys, organize stuff. And that's where we're at.
Yeah, so much to say there. I mean, one of the things, like, again, like, so my entry point was more of the sacred, but it absolutely, well, and even I kind of want to contextualize when I say that the sacred too, because my understanding, even that has been sort of like put in a kind of a patriarchal box. So sacred
Yeah.
means religion, and religion is like over here. And we're in a secular society. And so that lives over here, whereas other stuff lives over here. And to me, it's a much more, and I realize this word is problematic these days, but it's a much more shamanistic perspective, which is that life is precious and sacred. It's not, it is the revering of the experience of being alive is what we're talking about. And so for me, seeing some of these Paleolithic examples of women's bodies, which you have in the documentary, which is great, was like, oh my God, like, oh wow. If somebody actually sat down and took the time to intricately carve this woman's body, like, this meant something. This was sacred. This was special. This was important. All of art is sacred, right? If you're going to really sit down and like create, it is. So that's kind of, that's sort of my entry point into it. But it was so revelatory to me to even realize that there was a story that started beyond the point that civilization really was just an arbitrary line in the sand that had been drawn based on, I don't know, I guess the development of the written word or whatever it was, like there's different people who look at it at different points, but it was a total revelation to realize that there was this whole world and life before that.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting about the documentary is that you're bringing in the anthropological perspective on that and also the science perspective on that. Super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing, there's a part of the documentary where basically Chris talks to a geneticist, aside from the anthropologists and other scientists that he's spoken to kind of come to the point where the male brain, or let's say the testosterone brain, is much simpler. And this does not mean unintelligent. Chris is a genius, like on paper, in IQ, but sometimes he can be so simple in his way of handling something, meaning that he has a great way of describing it. When computers first came out and the color screens were very pixelated because they had very few greens, very few reds, so very few tonalities of colors. So it was pixelated. Nowadays, my God, everything looks almost sometimes better on your computer screen than in life, right?
Totally.
And that's the difference in brains. He sees things in like this green, maybe two other tonalities. When I'm looking at making a decision or creating an opinion around something, I am seeing shades and shades and shades. And what's great is because I'm seeing all those shades, I can bring in the different perspectives. Makes it harder to move in a direction, right? On his side, makes it easier to move in a direction. And that's why we need to work together. And what's happened having patriarchy, so this kind of top-down way of dealing with things, a few heads decide down, is you have this sectioning out, right? Two genders, because anything else is more too complicated. This many religions that we actually see as religions, and they have to be structured in a certain way or else too complicated. Spirituality, oh my God. what's that? Because that's all the tonalities, right? And that's the challenge. That's what we're living in. And it's hurting everybody because sectioning things off sections you. You do not live in a simple, clean little box. You have so many facets. So the same thing, even though Chris might see things in a more simplistic way than I do, he is not as simple. He does not fit into a box. So this trying to kind of fit into this patriarchal structure hurts him just as much as it does me,
Yeah.
just in different ways.
Well, and this was kind of like what you're speaking to was one of the big ahas for me in watching this movie was that I don't want to give it away. I want people to watch it. But basically, what you're talking about, I think it's the geneticist. I don't remember his name, but when he is pointing to the the X and the Y chromosomes, basically the conclusion is that I wrote this down and it feels unfair perhaps to men. So I'm kind of, I wrote down binary equals an inability to handle complexity. And I think
Yes.
maybe I would rephrase that and say a lesser ability to handle complexity or a need to categorize as opposed the ability to handle multiplicity. And that was such a huge aha for me because that describes, I think, me and so many women that I know to a T, and we often talk about it as a liability in a way of how we expect women to hold all these different things. Well, it's a liability if it's not respected. And if it's a liability if it's not that's not held in like sort of sacred container and then met, on the opposite side with something that supports that, then it is a liability. Also it's an incredible strength and it makes so much sense to me. So it's exactly, the whole point about gender or even the idea of the construct of marriage, which is like two people and it's going to last forever and that's just going to work, the idea of permanent continuity in general, feels like it's a flattening of complexity and it suddenly things make so much more sense to me when I think about it that way.
Yeah, and we have it in our verbiage, right? For how much time have you heard that it takes a village to raise a child? However, we haven't connected it back to the fact that the nuclear family stuck like that is not natural. A tribal structure is much more natural. I'm not saying that the couple status and the nuclear family doesn't work. Chris and I have been together. We just had our 38-year anniversary of being together. So it works for us. But oh my God, would I love it that he and I are part of a greater kind of tribe. Instead of having to create your tribe in in more patriarchal ways. Like we had a nanny for Gaia when we were younger, trying to make it part of the family and stuff. And it would work so much better if we lived in a tribe.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I also want to just clarify. I have been told that patriarchy is a political term by men, which just really drives me bananas. Like, I don't think it is. I think, I refer to Gerda Lerner's definition of patriarchy when I think of it, and I'll put her in the show notes. She wrote a great book back in the 60s, 70s called The Creation of Patriarchy. But it just basically means where power is consolidated primarily in the hands of men. And I think but sure, we can, of course, point to inroads, particularly here in the US, but that's still a fact. It's just a fact. But I would love to hear you talk too about, and I think probably some listeners know this, but it's helpful to just iterate when we say matriarchy, again, because of this lack of complexity, I think people can think that it's the inverse, and that's not what we're saying at all.
Not at all. Not at all. And it's too bad that it has that pater, mater, father, mother thing in the word, because it's not about female or male. It's the direction of where the decisions come from. So patriarchy is a structure where one head or a few heads decide what is good for everyone. And then the leadership goes down like that. Matriarchy is a structure where the community is looked at first and the future of our species. So the future for our children. So whatever is best for the community and the future of our children, that's where the leadership comes from. And then it's kind of spread out through the rest. And so, yeah, matriarchy is not taking off all the men in leadership and sticking women in there. It's a different system. And that's where I realized when I was in corporate life, I was really just sticking myself in a place where I had to think way left brained. I had to take my passion, my emotion, my creativity out of the picture. And that's where I felt myself very unbalanced. And so the divine feminine was getting, I'll put you in a box. And when I go to my meditations and when I meet with my female friends, then I'll let you out. But on a general basis, you're shut down.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. And
Yeah.
it doesn't work for males either. It's an imbalance there as well. And when we're going forward for the community and for our society and for our planet, the two need to mix. And look, I'm a kind of sci-fi nerd. If you take a look at Star Wars, if you take a look at Matrix and Star Trek, all of those, the ruling kind of group was always a set of elder council. And it was a mix of males and females and aliens, et cetera, of course, because it's sci-fi. But you know what I mean, right? You've got to bring the entire divinity together.
Yeah. So I'm curious, and I know you can't, I'm not going to ask you to speak for Chris. He's not here, but I am, you're married to him. You partnered
Yeah.
together on this film. So I would be really curious because I think, and this is really fresh for me right now. So just as a recording point for all of you, we are knee deep in whatever. We could name any number of crises that
Yeah.
we are facing culturally, but at the moment, like this reckoning around the Epstein files and the horror that is coming out is so deep and so profound. And a lot of the women that I know and that I follow across social media are really reckoning with this sense of betrayal, I think, that or this like whiplash of like, oh God, this goes this deep, which I think for me landed when I had my own sort of awakening to all this many years ago. So it's not surprising to me that a structure that was built without any participation or input of women and has survived on the suppression of women's authentic expressions would be toxic to women. That's like we would, of course,
Yeah.
But I think there's like a whole reckoning that's going on, coupled with a deep pain that so many men cannot seem to see why this is so devastating to women. And so I think my question for you is kind of like, in working with Chris on this film, like what is his understanding of sort of the male perspective and the male role on this? Because so often this is all treated as like, well, this is just women's stuff. This just has to do with women, right?
Yeah. So a scientist said this to Chris some years ago that I think is a perfect example of why he was so perfect to direct this film. And the scientist said to him, it's unlikely that it would be a fish who discovers water, right? Because if it's all around you, if it's ubiquitous to you, you somehow can't see it. So him as an outsider, looking at what's going on with me, looking at how I'm feeling this dread of my life being over, not so much physically, but emotionally, I'm being told like, yeah, you're done now. You're done with your fertility. What's your importance now?
Yeah.
I mean, aside from grandmothering a little later, when you have grandchildren, what's up? He really kind of was able to just keep asking questions and keep looking from the outside. And I'll tell you, the part in the film where we go to the geneticist, or he went to the geneticist, and he puts all of that in, I had an issue. I kept having an issue with for years, really, because I kept saying to him, it has to be a marriage, right? A balance of the two forces. And he's like, yes. But men have screwed up so badly that they need to be taken down the pedestal for now, so that you guys can rise. And yes, the ultimate thing is the balance. And then there's a part of the movie that that we basically show what's going on right now. How are we doing, right?
Yes.
And he nicknamed that piece, as he was editing it, Men Behaving Badly. And it's everything from the environment to wars to et cetera. And when he first put that piece together, he showed it to me and, do you have any suggestions? And I had suggestions, things to bring more forward, things we had forgotten and stuff. But female violence, or violence against females, and sexual violence against females was not in it, and I didn't even think of it. And then somebody gave us the book, The Bonobo Sisterhood. And halfway through reading that book, I was in floods of tears because I realized that I had internalized that I don't feel safe anywhere outside of my house, right? On different levels, right? That I just put that on. And it was like my water. It's just like breathing air. If I go outside, I've got a certain amount of shield. And if I'm in a dark parking lot, it's a harder shield, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't until I read the book that I was like, oh my God, we're missing a huge piece. And the minute I said it to Chris, his eyes are like, of course. And that's why we got in touch with Diane, who's the author, and
So great.
did that interview and put that whole piece. Because if you think about the fact that 1 in 3 women have been violently or sexually abused in their lifetime in the world, and it's 1 in 4 here in the US, that is going to affect you, and that is going to shut down your voice, right? And here's what I realized. I always saw myself as one of the lucky ones because nothing had happened to me that I would want to go to the police and say. But in reading the book, I realized that I had been consent raped. What that means is there had been situations, one in particular in my youth, where it got to a point where I made the decision just to sleep with the guy because if I didn't, I was fearing that it was going to get violent,
Yeah.
right? So I figured, it's one or the other. And once I realized this and I started talking to other women, how many other women? So it's not 1 in 4.
Oh, no.
It's half of us, if not more, right?
So much. Yes.
And that's one more place to shut down our voice, to shut down our feminine spiritual side.
Yeah. I'm wanting to tell this story publicly because it really kind of illustrates what you are saying there. I feel like this was many years ago. There was a swimmer who had assaulted a woman in California. I remember she was at a party. She was drunk. Like he gets caught like on top of her. And then there's a whole debate about, oh, we don't wanna ruin a promising young man's career, and she was at all of the conversation. And I remember having lunch with a friend of mine around that time, and she said, I had this experience in college where, I'd been drinking and I fell asleep and, it was like, I don't know why, I forget the exact details, but she wakes up and this guy is penetrating her with his fingers. And she's like, I didn't even realize that wasn't considered sexual assault when we were younger. That was just like, oh, I shouldn't have fallen asleep in that place and I shouldn't have been drinking. And when she said it, Dominique, I was like, oh my God, the same thing happened to me. The exact same thing. I was on a college trip in Italy and I happened to be sharing a bed with a friend, a female friend, and all the guys had been in the room partying with us, and this was a guy I hadn't even spoken to, and I wasn't particularly drunk, but I woke up and had the exact same thing happening. And thank goodness, I had a woman in the bed beside me that I trusted, and I felt very empowered. I was just angry. I felt safe enough to be angry, to be like, what are you doing? Get off of me. And he left, and it was never spoken about. But I didn't know that's a criminal act. And we
Yeah.
didn't even, this is exactly what we grew up with. And this was considered normal. Yeah.
And it changes your sense of safety. And any change of safety, what's going to happen? We are already taught as women to be nice, don't rock the boat. And I'm seeing the difference between the more current generations, even my daughter who's 18, in so many ways, she's like, what do you mean I have to be nice there? I don't care. Partly because of how Chris and I brought her up, not to, but also because it's less and less, not enough less and less, but less than us in the society.
Oh.
But that's where we're already brought up. Then something like that happens. You're like, wow, I really have to be careful about how I am, how I dress, what I say,
Right.
how I put myself out there, be it, with my creative desires, with the business I want to start, with the product I want to do.
Yes.
And
yeah.
that's what I hope that this movie does, that it gives permission to women to listen to the voice that's already inside. So what's amazing is when we've done screenings, and we did a whole bunch of screenings before we even put the film out to get feedback, etc. And as we do the Q&As, And whenever Chris talks to people about the movie or I talk to people about the movie, women are not surprised. When we say that it's evolutionary science, that women have a greater sense of social architecture, social organization, social leadership, and then postmenopausally, it gets even more directed, focused, clear. Women, it's not like they go, wow, really? No, it's always like, that's what I always thought. So we know it inside, but we just need to give ourselves the permission to live out of that.
Yeah. And I think that word permission is really compelling. And I do think, again, this was something the last podcast episode that I recorded, I do episodes in between interviews, and I call them the interstitials. So the spaces in between, the reflections that are coming up for me in between episodes. And this was something that was really coming up for me again with all of the revelations of the Epstein files, is that to me, and I would love to hear your response to this, to me, there's a way in which we can ask for inequitable systems to recognize us. And in doing so, it has a feeling of saying, give me permission to matter. And in doing that, are we giving those systems more authority than they actually deserve to have? Meaning, like, if it is a structure that was built without any representation of women, it feels to me kind of fundamentally corrupt at its core. So asking it to notice me is almost the wrong question, right? It's like, whoa, what are we going to build instead? Because there's no way that this thing is going to actually see my humanity.
Yeah. You can't ask somebody else to fill you up or to give you happiness, to give you love. All of those things are, my belief, something that has to come within you.
Yeah.
Then people around you can accentuate it, right? But if there are days that I'm not loving myself, no matter what Chris does, it's not going to change it. And as a matter of fact, we're probably going to have a fight because I'm so internally combusted that I bring it out and try to pick a fight with him. So yes, it's not about getting the permission from outside. So I'm just hoping that the knowledge in the film, the fact that how we feel, especially as older women, stands on 2 million years of our sisterhood, right? Of that knowledge. That can help us find that love of ourselves and permission of our voice. And I realized that I didn't fully answer the question of like, how does Chris feel about what's going on in the Epstein files?
Well, not so much the Epstein. Well, yeah. I mean, just more
Well,
of the,
I mean, because that's just
yeah. Yeah.
one more of the like mess that's
Yeah.
going on. So this was happening and he was asking OBGYNs or, menopause doctors for me, things like that. And then the first time that Trump won was on Chris's birthday. It was actually his November 9th that year of the first term. It was his birthday that he won. And one of the women from our first film, 40 Weeks, one of the pregnant women that we followed all the way through, texted him and said, I cannot even think how hard this is for you, that this is happening on your birthday, but I know that you will do something good with it. And that was kind of his moment of, because he'd been like fighting around there's like so much to know about this menopause thing. And he's like, no, that's it. I'm going down this road because women need to take over. It is enough with the bully structure and I'm done. And so for him, there are mornings, because he listens to the news every morning and stuff. There are mornings where I just have to hold him because he's like, what is happening? I can't believe it. Like, why doesn't anyone, like the whole fact that there's a whole side of our Congress that isn't even saying anything about the insanity. Yeah.
Incredible.
So
Well, yes. And I think, yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that kind of leads me, I want to go back to what I was saying about the sort of getting a system to recognize us. Cause I totally hear what you're saying on the personal level. And I think my question is more on the structural level. And so I think maybe a different way to come at that would be like, what's your hope coming out of this? Like, and I think like, where would you like to see us go? I mean, we obviously need we need radical change. That's it's very clear, right? And I think part of the thing that the Epstein files is kind of
Yeah.
stirred up in me is that question of like, God, where do we go from here? And if the system is really corrupt from the inside out, is the best place to start just to divest ourselves, even temporarily, from male authority, male opinion, and start to turn towards that inner wisdom, that wisdom within, and start dreaming new structures that are equitable. Because I don't know if these are retrofittable, I think is where I'm going with that. But I would love to hear what you think.
I personally think that we don't have to even turn away from. To me, it's let's look at what we need to do instead of undo.
Mm.
Basically, we just need to listen to ourselves, believe in ourselves, and speak. And if more and more women do that, then we are going to see different people in office. We are going to see structures change. Things that are meant to be checks and balances not only remain checks and balances, but get strengthened as checks and balances. And we are going to see leadership from community. And that's really the important thing, because what's amazing to me is when I hear sometimes the differences between conservative and liberal and stuff like that, we're really all talking about the same thing. We want the health of our communities, the health of our families, the health of our children, and the health of our future, right?
Yes.
And yes, some things have to open up because some communities look different than others. And that has to be allowed because I'm sorry, it's just I was a Roman Catholic. I will go to church with my mother occasionally, but I'm not that. And that should be okay. And it should be okay that my mother is and that I go to church with her. You understand?
I do.
So it's really start speaking. Do you remember Horton Hears a Who? The
Yes,
story.
of course.
So nobody's believing that there's an entire world in this speck of dust. And so he asks the Who's to all scream. And they're all screaming, but it's not getting through. It's not loud enough. And then they find one little baby who goes, whoo, and it goes through and everybody can hear them. And it really takes that. So it feels like I can't do anything because I'm just one voice. That's okay. Just keep stating, this is not right. We need different, because other voices are going to come together and eventually it'll be strong enough to change it.
I love that. I really love that. And I wrote down, focusing on what we need to do, not what we need to undo. I love that. That's such a beautiful reframe. And I appreciate that personally. Think maybe last kind of thing I want to toss out there and have you react to is just this idea of like, I wrote this down from the film and you said it as well too. Nature doesn't make mistakes. Like there's not mistakes. And so I think on my more positive days, there's even a question of like, what if our conception, like shaped on reproductive consciousness is the term that I believe the scientist uses or the academic uses in the film. That's not a mistake either. It's just like we're in an evolutionary process. And there's even part of me that wonders that because we're humans, we like to think of ourselves as sort of independent and separate, but we're not. We're completely interwoven in this ecosystem. And so there's a part of me that even wonders, like, all of the environmental pressure, all of it, like, what if it's actually supporting us evolutionarily to get to the things that we want to create and build and do that are more in alignment? It's not happening to us, it's happening for us. And that, in a way, despite the bleakness, gives me a little bit of hope.
I have a tremendous amount of hope.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I hope people understand from the film that we are putting across is that women are not only important for their fertility. Let's remember on the Eastern philosophy side, the second chakra, which is your chakra of creativity and sexuality, is placed at the place of the womb. It does not mean that how you use it is in creating humans. It can be if that's really what you want to do, but you can create from that energetic anything you want. And so what we're seeing by what's happening to nature, what's happening in more and more authoritarian regimes is women shutting that down and saying, you know what? I don't want to have children. It was never a real for me, and I'm not going to follow that along. That solves part of the kind of overpopulation that is causing some of the, or is causing a lot of the problems in nature. So you see that if you listen to yourself and you live truly by what feels right, you're actually getting more natural and things are working better. The other thing that gives me hope is a bully screams the loudest when it knows that it's losing its power. And that's what's happening. Patriarchy is over. It's not the natural way, and it's not going to work for us going forward. So to me, we talk patriarchy and matriarchy, but that's also like two extremes. There's something different coming. There's a balanced archy, I don't know what the word would be. And what's happening now is you're seeing the last dregs. That's why it's so ridiculous. And the ridiculousness, what's good is that it's making us listen, and it's making women come out of the fear zone and go, I'm going to educate myself and I'm going to speak. And that's the strongest thing, I think. And we made this movie to help women because now you've got the science behind it.
Yeah. And science talks, like, especially, I mean, there's a lot of my work and my experiences too have been much more informed by like the body wisdom and inner knowing, and the science is the language that we all kind of share and understand, and it's there
Yeah.
too, which is really powerful.
Yeah. And then older women, right? Let's remember now that most of us spend more years outside of fertility than we do in fertility. There's a reason, and it's a great reason. It's a time, later in life of wisdom, of leadership, of taking care of the community and rising the community. Use it.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and it's such a nice, and so I want to wrap by making sure you tell everybody how they can access the film, but it's such a nice, like, I just highly encourage women, especially in that perimenopausal and menopausal window, to watch this, because it's wonderful to see the conversations that are happening about perimenopause. Like, way to go, my Gen X sisters, for for getting this public conversation going. I'm proud of us. And a lot of it is still couched in suffering and insanity, and and there is some of that, there's no doubt, but I love like the story of like, but this is what's on the other side, and this is why this is happening, and it's actually incredibly empowering. You're not breaking, you're not falling apart, your life is not over. Hell no, it's the opposite. You are stepping into something so much bigger, and that is really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look, another quick thing, I started listening to my hot flashes. They were happening when I was not saying something I wanted to say or when I was stifling an emotion. And when I just let things go, I get a lot fewer hot flashes. And then I took a look at my other symptoms and said, okay, what do I need to do nutritionally, in my movement, in my sleep, to solve these, supplements, etc. And if hormone replacement works for you, go that path as well. But all the rest is also needed. And I now feel stronger, have more energy, and my tongue is not tied. So all of the difficulties, they're there to bring you through, to give birth to the leadership part of yourself. And so to see the movie, to get the science, go to Wise Women Movie. You can see the trailer and you can click rent from there. And the rental link, it's a great new platform called bingeable.net/wise women. And you can rent the movie.
Amazing. And I will be sure that's in the show notes. I strongly encourage everybody, just go watch this. I think I really I want to leave because it just feels so powerful and empowering to me, Dominique, for that statement of what we need to do, not what we need to undo. This is what we need to do. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to speak. We need to step into our power. We need to learn, and then, and lead the way that we know we can. So I just thank you and Chris so much for making this movie, for you, for taking the time to be with us today. It's such a gift. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you for listening. As always, I'm so glad that you are continuing to tune in and be on this journey with me. And if you like this show, please give it a favorable review. Subscribe so you stay up to date, and tell somebody else about it. Pass this on, share it. And until next time, take such good care of yourselves, and I'll be with you again very soon.